Hey everyone, this is Adam. I noticed in some sessions that people didn't understand how to use the debugging tools that are available to them within Visual Studio Code that allow them to be able to inspect the variables that they've created and to understand how the code was executing. I also noticed one of the challenges with Python is people understanding how loops work. And so I want to start by explaining something about the syntax of Python. Mm, For loops like these right here, we'll talk about this one right here, okay, are controlled by indentation. That is, the code that's indented inside the for statement is what's executed. In many languages, they would use a statement like next at the end of this that clearly defines when the loop starts back over again. And so for beginners that are just learning how to read Python, essentially, it might be helpful to put something like, here's the end of your for loop right here in comments down at the end of your for loop so you understand where the control happens. But control really happens because it's indented inside the for loop. Okay. So now that we've talked about indentation, let's talk about tools. So when I was learning how to write code over 40 years ago, you'd print this out on a piece of paper because you didn't always have a computer terminal, and you'd use a pencil and you'd walk the lines one at a time trying to debug where the code was going wrong. And what you'd do is you'd create what we call a state table. And you'd use something similar like this. You'd create every single variable inside of it, and then as you were walking through the code, you'd put the value of the variable inside of this. And as you were walking through the code one at a time, you'd update each one of these values to represent where you were at in time inside of it. That's a very old school and cool way to do things. Fortunately, we have modern debugging tools so we don't have to go use state tables and pencils to do this stuff. Inside Visual Code, you can create Visual Studio Code. You can create breakpoints inside your code, and I've added a breakpoint right here on this first for loop. And then you can click the debug Python file. It's going to execute. It's going to ask me this first line right here, the size, and so I'm going to give it a number like 3. And now it's going to hit this first breakpoint and it's going to stop. You might be on this tab here. Go down and make sure you click this run and debug button over here so that you can now see these things. And it says, hey, guess what? You created a size variable and it's 3. Just like our little old state table, we would put like a 3 right there when we were doing this manually, right? Okay, so now this for is trying to create a variable row. It hasn't been created yet, and the reason it hasn't been created is it has to figure out what this range value is. Now you notice we haven't created a specific variable for that, but one of the cool things is I can copy this expression and you can add a watch for expressions inside of this, and it says it's going to create a range from 1 to 4. Now range objects are normally zero based, and so the syntax is such that the last number is the number after where it stops, and that's why we do +1. If you want to go from 1 and do 1, 2, and 3, you say 1, 4, and that will result in it creating a list of numbers 1, 2, and 3 for you. Okay, makes sense? Okay, so that means that row is going to iterate or step one by one through the list of values that were created by the range. It's going to start at 1. The next time it goes through this loop, it's going to be a 2. And the next time when it gets down here to the end, it's going to go back and do a 3. Okay, and then it's going to go, there's no more numbers. 4 is the end of my loop, and so I exit the loop. And if there was another line of code after this, it would run that line of code. Okay, so we're going to step over this, use the step over. You can press this button right here, or you can hit F10. Okay, And what's going to happen is it created the row variable for us. And you can see it started at 1, just like I said, it's going to go 1, and then row is going to become 2, and row is going to become 3. Now we have another for loop inside of that, and so it's going to execute this for loop, and it's going to create the value column. You'll notice our range is exactly identical. We're creating a symmetrical multiplication table, right? 3 by 3. And so it's the same range. 1, 2, and 3 are inside of that. And so it's going to create the column value now as soon as I step over it, and you see it started at 1. Now I have this next line, and it's going to compute a cell value, okay, which is simply row times column. We know row is 1 and column is 1, and so when we create that value, it creates cell value equals 1. And the next thing it's going to do is print that cell value. And so down here in the console, we'll see it print that thing. And there it goes, it printed 1. And then as soon as it printed, it went back to the top of the for loop. And what it's going to do now is it's going to increment column from 1 to 2. As soon as we step off of that, it checks and goes, what's the next number inside this range? And now it created it, and you see it highlights what it changed over here. Column now becomes 2. Okay. We're going to go over here and hit step. Cell value is going to get computed, and it's 1 times 2, which is 2. It's going to print that 2 down there in the bottom. You can see it printed down there. It goes back up, and you guys can guess what's going to happen. It's going to make it a 3. It's going to compute that cell value as 3. It's then going to print the 3 down here. And now it's back at the top of our for loop. And guess what? We've done 1, 2, and 3. And so when I step over this, it's going to go down and it's going to exit the 4. And it's going to go to the next line of code, which is this print statement right here. So I'm going to hit this. You can see, boom, it jumped down there. The print statement's simply going to say, create a carriage return. We were using this end equals nothing right there, which means don't put a carriage return after I print. And so this will just simply go like this, and boom, now it moves the caret, the insertion point right here. Now it goes back up to our first loop where row started at 1, and now it's going to increment it to 2. And see, it changed it to 2. And now it's going to go back to that inner loop, and it's going to start the loop all over again, going from 1 until it gets to the end 4. So 1, 2, and 3. It's going to execute again inside this loop. And the difference inside this is now row is 2 instead of 1. And so when it does the computation, cell value becomes 2. And it's going to print that 2. It's going to go back to the top, change column to 2. And 2 times 2 is now 4 for cell value. It's going to print the 4. It's going to change column from 2 to 3. It's going to change, you can see right over here, it's going to change cell value to 6. It's going to print that 6, and then it's going to go, guess what? I've done 1, 2, and 3. I'm done. It's going to hit that print statement again, and it's going to go back to the top and get to the row. And row is 2. Remember, we're iterating or stepping through the list of 1, 2, and 3. And so it's now going to change row from 2 to 3. And then you can it'll start that column loop all over again, 1, 2, 3, like that. And so column starts at 1. 3 times 1 is 3. It goes to 2. 2 times 3 is 6. And goes to 3. And 3 times 3 is 9. And then hits that print statement. And then it goes up here to the top of the for loop. And it goes, I've done 1, 2, and 3. That's all you asked me to do. I'm exiting now. And the program ends. So you can see how you can step through your code one line of code at a time to see exactly how the values inside of it are changing. Whether it's an if statement or an elif or any of those statements, doesn't matter. You can walk through your code to be able to see where the problems are occurring inside your code. I hope this has been helpful.